Welcome everyone, and thank you Reno and Dan and Co for inviting me to give a presentation about Antarctic governance and tourism challenges as part of the PT Repair, Matchmaking and Information event that I unfortunately cannot participate in person. My name is Daniela Liggett. I'm a researcher and academic at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand and have been involved in Antarctic tourism research for the last 15 years or so. It is my pleasure to take you through a brief overview of Antarctic tourism development and governance, and then end up with a bit of food for thought. As you're all aware, Antarctic tourism has increased in numbers and also diversified in activities over time, especially since we've seen the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1990s, when a lot of the vessels formerly used by the Soviet Union became available for long-term charter. You can all see the development here in the graph. You will also see that aside from expedition cruises, which still form the dominant sector of Antarctic tourism, we also have larger cruise-only activities that do not involve landings, but that use larger ships carrying more than 500 passengers. And we also have some land-based operations here in gray and air cruise operations. Overall, just the cornerstones of Antarctic tourism are ship-based operations that are spatially focused and concentrated in the Antarctic Peninsula region, and are also concentrated, as we all know, over the summer months. Over the years, we've seen an extension of the tourism season, pushing now into October and April, when the ice conditions are a bit more severe, of course. We've also seen a change in tourist demographics towards an opening of the Asian market and a greater interest in Antarctic tourism expressed by the Chinese. And as a result, the numbers in Chinese tourists have increased quite rapidly. When we look at the increase in Antarctic tourism operations, we also have to keep in mind that it doesn't occur in isolation. We have a whole host of other human activities in the Antarctic, especially science and also fishing operations, both of which have increased in numbers and in the extent of their footprint over time as well, as you can see here on this graph. So fisheries, for instance, in the Ross Sea for Antarctic toothfish, have opened up in the late 1990s and have since increased. Similarly, Patagonian tooth fisheries have increased since the 1990s as well. And obviously, we've seen some ups and downs in the krill fishery in conjunction with the development of legal agreements that are regulating the fisheries in the Antarctic. We've also seen an increasing footprint in scientific activities and the number of stations and camps that we are having around the Antarctic continent at the moment. So we have to keep that in mind. In terms of Antarctic tourism governance, we've got two main tiers of regulation, with the Antarctic Treaty System, for instance, as the ultimate regulators that have legally binding mechanisms for Antarctic tourism as well as for other human activities. First and foremost, here we have the 1991 Protocol on Environmental Protection, which entered into force in '98 and provides legally binding regulation for all human activities that aims at minimizing the footprint on Antarctica and minimizing impacts of human activities in the Antarctic. We also have a number of legally binding measures. One that was signed in 2004 and deals with requirement for insurance and search and rescue cover, and another one that was put in place, signed in 2009, and deals with landing restrictions for vessels carrying more than 500 passengers. Neither of these measures are in force at the moment. We also have a host of hortatory, non-binding mechanisms dealing with various issues in relation to tourism operations, but those form a rather piecemeal set of codes of conduct rather than binding regulatory mechanisms. We also have to keep in mind that obviously any measures by the ATS only apply to those signatory states and their citizens of the AT, of the Antarctic Treaty and the protocol. Another tier responsible for some aspects of regulating Antarctic tourism is the International Association of Antarctica Tour Operators, or IATO, that are taking care of the de facto management of Antarctic tourism on the ground through their binding bylaws for all member operators, through a range of codes of conduct for visitors and operators, the requirement of issuing advance notification and post-visit reporting for any planned visits and actual visits. And they also extend the reach of the Antarctic Treaty System by requiring all operators, whether they're based in AT signatory countries or not, to follow the Antarctic Treaty System regulatory mechanisms, including those two measures which are not in force yet, but which IATO still mandates its operators to follow. IATO also requires the use of appropriate vessels and equipment and of trained staff. In addition to those key tiers, we also have a whole host of important external regulatory mechanisms that touch on Antarctic tourism operations as well, such as through the International Maritime Organization or the United Nations Law of the Sea. And I don't really have time to go into those, but do want to mention that these additional mechanisms exist. I do want to finish with a few items that I thought would provide food for thought and might further the discussion in this event. We have to keep in mind that impact has temporal, spatial, and qualitative dimensions. We have a range of impacted systems that extend beyond environmental systems and also include political and socio-cultural systems. We also have to keep in mind that impact occurs across time and space, and that while a lot of research has looked at local and regional impacts of Antarctic tourism, only a few studies have actually looked at the global footprint of Antarctic tourism, but also of other human activities in the Antarctic, such as scientific activities and logistics. Impacts can occur from transient impacts across to cumulative impacts, which are additive impacts of the past, present, and future. And there again, we cannot really distinguish between the impactor and whether it's a tourist or tourism operator or scientists or support staff. They all add to the overall effect on the ecosystem. So we have to keep in mind that we have to look at the bigger picture. We also have to ponder whether the current spatial concentration of Antarctic tourism across less than 20 most frequently visited sites is sensible, or whether a dispersal of local impacts across more visitor sites that might be opened in the Antarctic Peninsula region in the future would be wise. I don't have an answer there, but it is something that we might want to think about. When we talk about impacts, we also have to think about potential benefits. We cannot just focus on negative impacts. And certainly with regard to Antarctic tourism, we see a range of benefits, including advocacy and education and outreach, as well as a contribution to environmental movements, for instance, of funding towards Antarctic conservation in the Peninsula region and beyond. We also have to keep in mind that there is quite a bit of citizen science going on board of cruise vessels and other Antarctic tourism expeditions. And we might want to ask how we can make better use of the data generated already through automated vessel systems, such as recordings of water temperature and flow and air temperature, wind direction and wind speed, and potential alternative and additional automated systems that could be installed on cruise vessels that could thereby be transformed into vessels of opportunity for science rather than just being tourism vessels as such. In addition, Antarctic tourism also provides support to scientists by, for instance, transporting them to the Antarctic and back, or transporting their gear. And in addition, the more vessels we have operating in the Antarctic, the more potential there is for having assistance when we need it in cases of incidents or accidents in the Antarctic. So the standby fleet for rescue operations is much larger. But on the other side of the coin, of course, the more vessels we have, the more possibility there might be that there is an incident involving one of those vessels. We also have to ask ourselves, as I've already touched on before, whether we can actually separate human activities by type when the impacted system does not distinguish between what kind of human actor caused the impact. All these different human activities, science, tourism, fishing, other activities, interact and add to cumulative impacts. So to what extent do we have to keep in mind the bigger picture and see what other activities are occurring in the region? When we think about Antarctic tourism governance, we have to also keep in mind that the regulatory reach of the Antarctic Treaty System is limited to signatory states. And also that we have seen a bit of a slacking of political will, of sense of urgency with regard to tourism regulation in the past 20 years or so. So we may need to think beyond traditional policy options and consider how we can take into consideration human values, motivations, and behaviors across cultures, keeping in mind that we are seeing a shift in demographics, and work with behavioral psychology in order to develop best courses of action. Could we potentially think about co-producing regulatory mechanisms to a greater extent that bring on board all actors involved in the activity as well as the regulators? And seeing that we already see some sense of co-management with IATO taking care of a lot of the in situ management of tourism in the Antarctic, can we formalize that to a greater extent and make it work more efficiently and better in line with more formal regulatory options? We also might want to ask along those lines what role self-policing and peer pressure can play in enforcing compliance, seeing that we do not have the capacity to undertake official policing in the Antarctic Treaty Area due to its remoteness and its size. And then finally, whatever we do, I think we have to keep in mind that we need to think creatively and strategically about Antarctic tourism governance in a world in which humanity's ecological footprint already exceeds biocapacity. COVID-19 may have given us an opportunity to reflect on what kind of activity is really necessary in the Antarctic to pursue and further science and also advocacy and education and outreach activities, and what we might have to do in order to more sustainably undertake human activities in the polar regions in the future. And I hope you have got a really good discussion following this presentation, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you.